In the psychiatrist's chair, Gore Vidal talks to Professor Anthony Clare.
Novelist, playwright, essayist, satirist, controversialist, with a seemingly insatiable need to shock, Gore Vidal is, as his admirers and detractors agree, a phenomenon, someone impossible to categorise. He is generally regarded as one of the most inventive American novelists of ideas, with such bestsellers as Myra Breckinridge, Burr, Lincoln, Washington, D.C., to mention but a few of his prolific output of broad range of fiction. He's also had successful careers as a playwright on Broadway, as a scriptwriter in television and in Hollywood. From his Washington childhood, with its high political and social connections, he's been both an active participant in and a keen observer of American politics over more than 50 years. He's also well known for his exploration of homosexuality, or same-sex sex, as he prefers to call it, in novels like The City and The Pillar, and for the many friendships and feuds with famous literary and political figures like the Kennedys, Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote. The much-quoted "whenever a friend succeeds, a little something inside me dies" is a typical example of his aphoristic wit. Gore Vidal, in Palimpsest, in your memoir, you say, "I may not have known well any of the characters in this drama, but I was certainly more interested in my view of them than I was in my view of myself." But I think you are obviously interested in your view of yourself.
Well, anyone who writes a memoir betrays a certain interest, but it's pretty minimal. I always said I would never do a memoir because I was not my own subject. Most writers are their own subject and are highly regarded. There's my friend Norman Mailer, my friend Philip Roth. They do nothing but write about themselves. Yet I am called a narcissist who's constantly writing about himself, even though I write about everything else but. So I finally said, all right, I will write about myself. But indeed, it was the people that I had met that I thought were more interesting to analyze than myself.
Well, one of the most interesting ideas that surfaces from time to time is this idea you have of the other half.
Well, I get the idea, obviously, from Aristophanes in Plato's Symposium, that each of us is looking that we were originally spheroids and we were split in half. I like that image. Everybody sort of likes that image. It has elements of absurdity, but I believe I am fascinated by duality and by twins. My grandmother was a twin, and she lost her twin at birth, and she attached herself to Senator Gore, her husband, who was blind from the age of 10 and really needed her. I mean, it was not just a loyal wife. She was his eyes. So she had her twin, and I was brought up by them. And I think there was something about twins that got into me that I had an instinct for.
Did she talk about her dead twin?
She wouldn't talk about it. I just found out about it in due course. And I asked my mother, I asked my grandfather about it. And there had been something missing in her life, which was filled by meeting this very attractive blind boy, whom she married over her family's dead bodies, because they said you'll end up on a street corner with a tin cup begging. And, of course, he went straight to the Senate, and so she had a rather nice life. The idea that one is completed by another person is an attractive notion in youth. I can't say that I've ever been into the twin business ever since adolescence, but I was brought up with a boy in Washington to whom you are certainly going to aim this conversation, called Jimmy Trimble, and I was 1 week older than he was. We were born in the same year and the same month. And we both enlisted, I in the Army at 17, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. And on the 1st of March, 1945, he was killed at Iwo Jima. And I felt as if half of my life had gone.
You're very suspicious, and I share, as a psychiatrist, much of your suspicion of modern psychiatry.
Oh, yes.
You're very sceptical of no doubt, the role that psychoanalysis has played in American life. Where does this fastidious distaste for it all come from?
Well, you should have been in New York in the 1940s. I could have led you from psychoanalyzed group to all of the great bores had been analyzed, and they had become more boring as they found out Freud's terminology, which was always wrong. Oedipus did not have an Oedipus complex. It's very simple. He didn't know he had married his mother.
Indeed, and killed his father.
Yes, and whenever he uses classical terms, Freud gets it wrong. Freud's great work, I regard him as a brilliant novelist. I think his book on Leonardo da Vinci has nothing to do with Leonardo, but it's a rather beautiful metaphoric novel.
You rather liked his hatchet job on Woodrow Wilson, too.
Well, I love the hatchet job on Woodrow Wilson. Now, here's Sigmund Freud, the original psychiatrist, breaking every rule in the book. He does a psychoanalysis of a man he's never met and knows very little about except what William Bullitt, a partisan politician, had told him. But he's out to get Wilson because Wilson had broken up the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was one of the great forces for stability in Middle Europa. So Freud struck. I love the book, but it's not very professional.
But you never felt any inclination to go the route of self-exploration of that kind.
How on earth could a real writer, need it? What we do all the time is working our unconscious. There are certain writers for whom there is no dark secret to delve. I have no secrets. I have embarrassments, as everybody does, but that's about all. And not much embarrasses me either. So you asked me about psychiatry. I knew at a very early age. I wrote my first published novel when I was 19. I was using everything. I wasn't holding anything back, except out of tact, perhaps, or fear of libel. And this kind of clearness is very un-American. Americans like to think that they're tortured and tormented, and many of them are, because it's an ugly society, religious mad, and even more hypocritical than the British, and filled with disappointment. Everybody's disappointed in his life for one reason or another. And I'm not disappointed, and I go on. And I've been publishing for 54 years now, and never regretted it.
You describe yourself as a solitary child, not a lonely child.
Well, I certainly didn't like the company of other children. I liked the company of adults because they were more interesting.
It is hard to think of Gore Vidal as a child.
Yes, I believe they found it difficult to think I was one when I was one either.
They did?
Yeah. My mother used to complain about how critical I was. And I finally said, I must have been about 8 or 9, but I'm a critic. I didn't even know what the word meant.
You mentioned about conscious and unconscious. Actually, you write quite a bit about dreams, and dreams that you dream.
I have what I think of as a birth dream. My mother's had a very narrow pelvis, and I was born in the cadet hospital at West Point. And Major Snyder, who was the officer of the day, no mean physician, may I say, delivered me and made kind of a mess of it, and it was very difficult, and he wouldn't have known how to do a cesarean, which is what they needed, so I came out fairly squashed in the process. I have the dream that I am going through, it's a claustrophobic dream too. I'm trying to maneuver my way over rocks, and there's nothing viscous about it, and I sort of see a light ahead, and I can't get my head through. Well, that has got to have something to do with that trauma.
And that's recurrent. You have that occasionally.
I don't have it much anymore. I had it off and on for a long time, yeah.
And are there any vestiges of claustrophobia about, other things you avoid, or?
Well, I can't say that I fancy lifts.
Yeah.
I've been stuck in them too often in countries where the electrical supply is not steady.
What was your mother like when you were a very small boy?
Well, according to Freud, she was a perfect mother. I was on her nipple for a year, so I was breastfed, which, according to Freud, means you are omnipotent, or you think you are. And she began to drink rather heavily when I was about 4 or 5.
Do you know why?
Well, she was a disappointed woman. She was very handsome. She was extremely ambitious, but without any energy, any working energy at all.
She was ambitious.
Yes,
but what?
Just to be famous, to be great. But she didn't do anything. She tried acting. She did this. She did that. And my father was a great All-American football player. He was in the Olympic Games at Antwerp in track. And at a very young age, I think he was about 36 or 7, he was in the cabinet of the president and found these airlines. Well, she convinced herself that she had done all that she had started Eastern Airlines and TWA and Northeast Airlines, which were his 3. And she died convinced that she had done it all and just carried him along as he was useless. And then the quarrels got very bad, and then she marries a very rich man whom she didn't care at all for, Mr. Auchincloss, and had 2 children by him, and she had actually believed that he wouldn't have sex. That was to be a condition of the marriage.
She didn't want sex because?
Because, A, he was unattractive, B, he also had orgasm without erection, and had been to many psychiatrists. Perhaps this is the origin of my feeling about your trade.
Perhaps
did him no good at all. And even his mother was worried, and she was a stern old dowager, and she put it down to excessive masturbation in youth. And he never had probably proper sexual congress with anybody. And, however, was very fecund. I mean, he had 5 children. And she would describe how the children were inserted, the future children. I would stop listening. I mean, in her cups, she would tell me the story.
Would.
Oh, yes.
What age would you be when? Because you do write that, but I wasn't sure what age you were.
It went on about 10 to when I stopped seeing her.
Yeah.
But he did indeed have 5. She had 2 children by him. But I can see from her point of view, this guy wants to have sex all the time and can do nothing of a satisfying nature. Even a steady woman would get on her nerves having this sort of attention. So she just drank and drank and drank, took up with an old boyfriend, a general in the Air Force, and finally walked out on Mr. Auchincloss.
Was she an affectionate mother?
Not really, no. The likable thing about her was that she never treated any of her children as if they were children. She treated them as adults, so whatever was on her, what could be called her mind, she would share it. Well, I was fascinated by that.
Given what you've described of her, I mean, she sounds, in her own way, interesting. But it all became a distance. You never saw her for many years.
Well, the last 20 years of her life, I refused to see her.
You refused? It was an active thing.
Oh, I kicked her out, yes. Well, she got worse and worse. And
when you say you kicked her out?
So she was staying with me in London. And she was drunk the entire time and making scenes. I had rented a flat, but servants went with it. This is back in the 50s, and they all quit because of her. And I was writing a movie for MGM.
Which one was that?
It was The Scapegoat with Alec Guinness.
Yeah. And she was here
with a drunken director. Yeah, I thought I'd do something nice for her. Because she did like London, and an old boyfriend of hers, Jock Whitney, was our ambassador. But she was too drunk to see him. So it was really probably should have sent her off to a hospital, but I'm not a nurturing kind. No, she became AA. She did give up drink after she got kicked out, yeah. I have a half-brother who went right on seeing her until she died, and said she didn't drink again after she had been shipped back across the Atlantic.
And did you write, or did she?
No, I didn't. She occasionally would demand money, so I would have my accountant send her something, but I didn't have direct contact with her at all. And she had the same effect on her daughter, who wouldn't speak to her either for the last years. But I think, if I may make a comment about psychiatry, you put too much emphasis, I don't mean you personally, but generically, on the relationship between mothers and sons. to say that my relations with the mother would be in any way either crippling or deforming or the making of me, whatever interpretation you want to put on it, would just be wrong. There were too many other people. First of all, we're brought up by servants. That's whom we really see. So there was a servant about, a nanny. And you had other people who were friends, including members of your own family. I was on very good terms with my father and extremely good terms with Senator Gore. And my grandmother, if you want to have a classic mother figure, that was the one. So, any relation with my mother, I know it looks like a wonderful Freudian plum cake, but it just didn't work like that. I mean, I was so glad to be sent away to school and not have to see her, and to be able to go off with my father in the summertime and not see her. And then finally to say, I'm never going to see you again in 1957 here in London, was sheer joy. So it's a relationship that I don't think it added up to much. You could say the only lasting effect it had on me was absolute negative feeling about marriage. I'd seen every member of my family has had terrible marriages.
Though your grandparents, the senator and
yes, but they were twins. To get back to your original image, yes.
So if
she was his eyes, and he needed her, and she needed him because she had lost her twin. So that was a very special case.
So if you're lucky and find your twin.
Yes, but then why get married at all? There's so much around. I mean, if it's lust you want, and that's all I wanted in my youth, there's plenty of it to be found. People don't seem to make much of my observation, never have sex with friends.
Yes,
It's very easy
never have
to...
sex with friends.
Don't, because you'll lose the friend as you lose interest in the sex. Keep the friend and have sex with somebody else. And God knows, the world is full of that.
Have you ever retained a friendship that you'd had sexual relations with, that you'd sex with?
Rarely. It may happen, but that would...
But of course, yes, you said, I'll get to Jimmy Trimble. Well, only in the sense that you wrote about it.
Well, and I would never have written about it if a clever journalist at Vanity Fair hadn't done some sleuthing, because I dedicated The City and the Pillar to the memory of J.T., and he started to ask around at St. Albans and found out who it was, and wrote it. I would never have mentioned the name, and I would never have let anybody know.
Why? Why wouldn't you?
Well, why would I? He had a mother who was alive until 2 years ago.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I mean, it has revealed an aspect of you that rounds you out. I mean, as it turns out, you say it was... I think you say it in your own superb language, something like that it was the single most significant relationship in your life.
Yes, and I didn't figure that out till I started to write the memoir. That is an aspect of memoir writing that's useful.
Did you meet his mother when you knew Jimmy, when he was alive?
Mm-hmm.
And when you met her again, how did she cope with your revelation that you had a relationship with her son?
Southern ladies know everything. They're born knowing everything, and they're born unshocked.
The nearest thing to what if in your memoir was reflecting on that relationship. You say, to this day, in another world, in almost another century, I've wondered what might have become of our so swiftly completed maleness. Is it only for a season that wholeness endures? It then leads to a reflection on the extent to which satisfied desire or fulfillment is, by definition, temporary.
Oh, it is. Yes, it's evanescent. That seems to be the history. Why is it that all romantic stories end in Juliet's tomb? Here were two teenagers from Verona, slightly mentally deficient, was always my feeling, reliant upon an extremely unreliable priest to get messages through, so they come a cropper. Well, people criticize The City and the Pillar for its ending, which is
And of course yours, your own, ends violently. He dies at Iwo Jima. But you said that when you learned the news, that was a stunning blow. You
Yes, it was.
on...
I was on my way to Washington, and I'd heard that he was supposed to be coming home. His term of service was up. And I was stopped off in Jackson, Michigan, to see an aunt, and got the news there. And I was startled by how much it had upset me. You know, in a war, you lose so many people that are friends, so many people that you like or just are accustomed to knowing. They aren't there anymore. And our generation suffered the greatest casualties of any, because we all went in at 17 and were insufficiently trained. The Battle of the Bulge, I lost half of my Exeter classmates, who were thrown into that really unprepared for, that was the famous German counteroffensive right at the end of the war. So you got pretty hardened to it. I mean, you know, oh, Bill's dead, didn't you know? No, I didn't know. You became a bit anesthetized, so I was startled that the anesthesia had worn off, and I got this news. You
often give off a sense that you're such a perceptive observer. You're so unwilling to ever be seduced into the kinds of admiration or affection even for various kinds of people. You're a wary man, I often feel, because you see where emotions take people. But I wonder, that relationship, clearly, it was a savage blow to see it ruptured. But how protected are you?
Well, I should say pretty well protected. I had a camera crew. I did a documentary on Washington, D.C. for Grenada. And we went out to the cemetery, and I stood by his grave, and they had the camera on me for about an hour, waiting for me to give way. Didn't give way at all. I just kept thinking about the arthritis in my right knee.
Were you fearful you might give way?
No.
But I wondered about the extent to which you felt this will affect the way people see me.
I have no interest in the way people see me.
You haven't?
None at all.
Though you
the
like...
fact they... Well...
You like people
when they
interested in you?
No, I like them to be interested in what I'm interested in. And I try to make what I'm interested in interesting for them. If they neglect to play the anthem as I enter the room and, you know, swoon, I mean, I think that, you know, bad faith perhaps.
So in writing about Jimmy Trimble, you didn't worry about what other people might think?
Well, I worried about his mother when I realized she was alive. Yes, I didn't want to hurt her
not
feelings.
Not about you?
No. I add one proviso. I don't like people who talk about their sex lives. I don't like people who tell all. I'm not interested in it from other people, and I don't do it myself. So this is my one wild oat that I have discussed.
Sometimes you get your vision's very bleak.
Well, that's because I'm alive. When I'm dead, it'll be more serene.
Is there an internal bleakness? Do you ever get overwhelmed by it? Do you ever become profoundly melancholic?
No. But I think that has more to do with my genetic base than anything else. I'm quite cheery, actually. First of all, if you take a somber view, you're often pleasantly surprised when things are not as bad as you suspected they would be. So, no, I think I have a serene disposition.
You do? You sleep well?
Oh, yes.
You've never, ever... There's an account somewhere that you have the occasional rumble, I think, or you used a word that interested me, and now I've forgotten it, rather than any kind of nervous breakdown.
Yes.
And I wondered what that was about. How... Do you ever get upset to the extent that you feel pox on it all?
No, I don't feel that. I am extremely belligerent, and that is probably my worst characteristic. And I am... The Gores are Celts, and the Celtic sense of honor is exaggerated, and of injury to amour-propre is excessive. And the Celts, of course, occupy the southern part of the United States, which the Gore family come from. So I am belligerent. And eye for an eye, and I know this is ridiculous because it gets you into all sorts of unnecessary problems. But I cannot not hit back. I don't go around hitting people, but I certainly believe in a swift, preferably terminal, response.
So such regrets as you might have might be that you were excessively combative or you overdid it.
Oh, yes, and that I took it. My grandmother noticed this about me very early, and after the City and the Pillar, she said, you got to be very careful not to stir up more snakes than you can kill. And I said, is that an old Southern expression? She said, no, I think I just made it up. But well, I was always stirring up snakes, and I was not ever able to kill them all.
Yes. So that accounts to an extent, anyway, for your life being peopled by confrontations, arguments, some great exchanges.
The press gets everything wrong. I mean, my row with Norman Mailer has nothing to do. They put it down to envy, he of me or me of him or whatever. It was political. We were arguing over women's liberation. He'd written an attack on it, and I attacked him. And he took it more personally than he should have. Now, that was perhaps my Celtic overkill. I don't know.
One feud, and then I want to get back to your dreams. One feud that, or not feud, one your dislike that I'm interested in is Robert Kennedy. Well, I wondered why. What was it about Robert Kennedy? You really actively disliked him.
Oh, anybody who knew him well, who was not a slave, disliked him. He was reactionary, right-wing, sort of out of the Christian Brothers, which is a very reactionary order in America. He was a Joe McCarthy friend to the end and worked for McCarthy's committee. He was everything I disliked. And our fight took place when I was running for Congress in 1960 and Jack was running for president, at Saugerties Landing on Halloween. And we waited 2 hours. He was in charge of New York State for Jack. And he arrives and makes the world's worst speech, mumbling, my brother, my brother, my brother. And then he turned to me with a snarl and said, why don't you ever mention the ticket? And I said, because I want to win. And I said, I'm running ahead of Kennedy. And if he weren't on the ticket as president, I would win this election for the House. And it proved that I got 20,000 votes more than Kennedy did. And that's how it started. And then he did everything to damage me, and I did everything to damage him.
You said it's your grandfather, isn't it? If I got anything from that's your grandfather, Senator. Da. It was the ability to detect the false notes in those areas that our shepherds lull their sheep with.
It's fun.
It is. You say somewhere else, you like con men.
Oh, yes, I love con men. And politics is essentially a con game. I remember Jack Kennedy getting up and making a speech in a farm state on agriculture. And he knew as much about agriculture as I knew about nuclear physics. And as he came off, he said, I didn't understand a word I said. He was just reading. But he was so passionate about agriculture in this speech. And that's the fun of that game.
We talked about you being wary of emotions and the camera crew around the graveside, but you talk about death, summer. This triad haunts me. This is in your book. So much was cruelly lost, and one still mourned the past, particularly in darkened movie houses. And I have a picture of sort of that, despite yourself, some pretty wretched movies move you to tears. Are you a weeper?
Oh my God. I weep torrents whenever Betty Davis gets into trouble. I sit there.
You're not conning
barking
me now,
in agony. No.
You do weep.
Betty brings out. She just turns on the tears. Yes.
Why?
Almost alone.
Why? Do you know why?
Well, first, she's a very great actress. First movie I ever wrote was for Betty Davis, called Wedding Breakfast over here.
All right, that's one reason. What else?
And well, it's obviously an actor is tapping into emotions which are common to the spectator. And if the actor is doing it superbly well, of course you will be caught up in it. That's the catharsis of art, really. And whether it's high art or low art, that is a property of it, to which I am as susceptible as anyone.
You say you feel surprisingly serene about contemplating the end of your life. Do you worry about dying?
Oh, the process everybody worries about. The countdown is going to be very unpleasant. And now I have a pretty good idea what I'm dying of. I have diabetes. In Italy, it's called senile diabetes. They're quite tactless there. I think it's adult something or other they call it.
You don't need insulin. You can modify your diet.
I modify the diet, and I have to take pills, and you take your blood every morning. And
the British call it mature onset diabetes.
Mature onset. They always have a name for things.
So when did you discover that?
About 6 or 7 years ago, and I simply paid no attention to it. I don't know why, since I'm a bit of a hypochondriac. But
are you?
Yes.
In what way?
In that way.
Well, what other ways?
Well, I sort of denied to myself. Clinton got off a wonderful line recently. He was talking in Davos to the wealthy nations and what they should do about the poor nation. And he said, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Well, I was...
Tell me about your hypochondriasis.
Oh, hypochondriasis. Well, any lump, I think, is cancer, that kind of thing. And sometimes they are. I've just had a squamous cell carcinoma removed from my wrist.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting, that. That gave me quite a turn. Did he get it all out? I said, looking at this Italian doctor who was working with what seemed to be a butter knife that he'd taken from the plate.
Yes.
And those things bother me. Then I get something serious like diabetes, and I don't pay much attention to it. And then suddenly you begin to see symptoms, and you have to take your pills and follow a pattern. I was going to say, it's nice to know what you're going to die of. Complications due to diabetes. I can already see the obituary. And then I remember that Allen Ginsberg came to see me about a year before he died, and he had diabetes. And he said, it's an awful ending. Unless you have a heart attack or something, it's sudden. And then he goes off and dies of liver cancer. So he doesn't even die of diabetes, and I thought, well, Mother Nature can trick you.
Mm-hmm. I'll take you back to this. You'll say, oh, God, this is Freud again. But you wrote this. You were talking about this phenomenon of eidetic imagination, which I understand to mean having this very vivid, powerful, visual recall. And you wrote somewhere, despite my aversion to Freud, I find a most odd explanation for this by Georges Simenon. It is sometimes said that a typical novelist is a man who is deprived of motherly love. The fact is that the need to create other people, the compulsion to draw out of oneself a crowd of different characters, could hardly arise in a man who is otherwise happy and harmoniously adjusted to his own little world. Why should he so obstinately attempt to live other people's lives if he himself were secure and without revolt?
Well, that's Simenon, but I thought it well worth quoting, because every good novelist must make the case for the opposition as well as for his own position. And you must anticipate what it is that you may have got wrong, what it is you may not have understood yourself. So I put Simenon in as a voice for the other side, so that Dr. Clare can look at me shrewdly. I can tell you can't see him out there on radio, but his eyes are glittering now. It looks ready to strike as he's getting nearer and nearer.
What do you think of Georges Simenon's view that you quoted so admirably?
Well, I thought it showed how wise and clever I was to quote it. I don't know if it was wise and clever of him to have written it, and he had a different woman every day, and a very, very good cook. And when he lived in Connecticut, his wife would have to beg him at least once a month to go to bed with the cook because the food was off. And unless he regularly attended to the cook, they were going to starve to death. So groaning and moaning, Simenon would go to bed with the cook, and they had set a great table. As I said earlier, my position is that as the mother didn't have all that much to do with bringing me up, I was brought up by servants, and had a grandmother to fall back on. I've never considered her significant except as a cautionary tale that excessive alcoholism is going to lead you into a lot of trouble.
Well, you would expect me to ask, obviously, the extent to which it influenced your views of women. You wrote, it is the men who are usually more sentimental or at least more responsible to the whole experience, no matter how brief, than the woman who is not thinking of the man who makes love to her, but of the end product of that act, the egg she means to lay.
That's me.
Your wariness of love.
Well, I'm wary of people who go on about it. And I also quite understand that people don't know what it is. They confuse it with lust. And, of course, lust doesn't last very long, and then they're out of love. Well, why not just call it lust and settle for that and have as good a time as you can and move on? That would be my only message to the troops.
Because love is an illusion.
Well, it's a double illusion. There are two people involved in it. But the old de la Rochefoucauld, there's always one who loves and one who is loved, showing that there is generally not much symbiosis going on. There's one person who is passionate about the other one, and the other one who endures it or goes along with it, but sooner or later will drift off. That seems to be the human condition. That is the subject of practically every other novel written.
That's true. But it doesn't stop us seeking it.
Well, we're supposed to procreate. We're supposed to. We are so geared, and the society, God knows, is ferocious on the subject. Heterosexuality is considered such a great and natural good that you have to execute people or put them in prison if they don't practice this glorious act.
But even same-sex lovers seek love.
I don't know. I'm not into the generalizing business about what others do. I don't know what others do. Like, one has theories, and you can describe something from your point of view, but...
Well, you generalize about the illusory nature of love. You say, more or less, it's a fantasy.
The evidence supports me on that, starting with the divorce rate in my own country.
But your own country has the highest divorce rate. You could certainly say that your own country, it seems to be impossible, certainly.
Yeah. But the divorce rate would be higher in other places. Catholic countries, they just don't marry.
Or they just don't divorce. They
don't
have
divorce.
A different kind of arrangement.
Yes, which generally works rather well.
Would you describe yourself as a happy man?
What is happy? There's a long and pregnant silence here, and I want to tell the radio audience that at this moment, the psychiatrist is baffled, but he is plucky. He's going to move in. The big guns are now coming on to the scene.
I'm interested to know.
Here's Big Bertha over there.
I'm interested to know if you think of yourself as a happy man. God, you come from a country where the pursuit of happiness is built into its
Declaration of
imperial
Independence.
Statement of, that's right, it's Declaration of Independence. What, and you know that in addition to pursuing love, we pursue happiness. We pursue some notion of contentment. It's very hard because the word itself includes a lot of other things.
Yeah, would you say masochist pursuing happiness? Each in his own way?
Go on, tell me.
It's hard to generalize.
Where are you?
That. Talking to you about this.
No, in relation to happiness. You think it's an illusion too?
There was a great Harold Macmillan story that he was at Rambouillet when he was Prime Minister with his wife and Charles de Gaulle and his wife Yvonne. And they were talking about having lunch, just for them, what they were going to do when they left office. And Macmillan said he would probably write a book, a memoir, and de Gaulle said yes, he would write a book. Then Macmillan said that the wives were saying nothing, so he turned to Madame de Gaulle and said, "And what would you like most when you leave office?" She said, "A penis." And Macmillan said, "Oh, I quite see, how," and certainly, began to stammer around. And de Gaulle, without cracking a smile, said, "Madame means penis.
Right. Well, I'll put away the Freudian Big Bertha that you referred to. but clearly, let me put it differently. Then, I've established that you have a fairly equable temperament, apart from periods of bellicosity, and you are not deeply melancholic person.
No.
You can observe the human condition without it, to use crude common parlance, getting to you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get overly upset.
No.
You fear dying, as we all do, the process of dying,
Yes.
but not being dead.
No, it's no different from what it was like before I was born, which I remember very, very well. I'm the only person who does.
Remember before you were born?
Yeah. There wasn't much to do, but, it was quite pleasant.
It was
I think you
quiet.
would describe it as happy.
It was quiet.
It was
I
quiet,
presume.
yes.
There weren't
Not much fuss.
Not much opportunities for the bellicose Vidal.
No, and you didn't have to, dress for dinner.
That was Gore Vidal in the psychiatrist's chair, talking to Professor Anthony Clare.